Welcome, everyone. Today is December 4th, 2019. I'm Dr. Terry Hildebrandt, the Director of Evidence-Based Coaching at the Fielding Graduate University. And tonight we have an esteemed panel for our Evidence-Based Coaching Professional Series webinar. We are going to be talking tonight about elevating your coaching practice with intercultural competence. We're very excited to have Akasha and Magda Kaspary. Akasha is an instructor and alum of Fielding. Magda is also an alum of Fielding, so we're thrilled to have both of you here tonight to talk about your experiences with intercultural competence. I'm going to also give you just a chance to introduce yourselves in a little more detail by answering the first question that we've prepared for this evening. And it is, what got you interested in coaching, and specifically intercultural sensitivity and competency? So who'd like to start out tonight for us?
Akasha would like to start.
So Akasha, you've been volunteered or voluntold.
Volunzoomed. Sure. Wow. So coaching, the short story is I was living and working in Bermuda, feels like almost a decade ago. And I was working in banking. And I found that I was more interested in my co-workers' goals and how they were living their lives than I was in nickel and diamond customers. So I thought, maybe not banking. Maybe something where I work more directly with people around their goals and their growth and development. So I searched for a coach training program, found one, and the rest is the present. And IDI, intercultural competency. Wow, in a way, I've always been interested in intercultural competency. Being someone from the Caribbean, being Black and living, working in many spaces that have been white or at least non-Caribbean, has made that salient for me, made intercultural competence and sensitivity salient for me. One of the things that got me really interested in the marriage between coaching and intercultural competence was as an experience I had with a coach that I was working with. And I may share more about that story later, but it was a situation where I felt my cultural identities or those dimensions of my identities were invalidated in part of our conversation, and it made me feel unsafe with working with her. So it has a significant impact, we would say, or importance in coaching relationships. I mean, any relationship actually, but in terms of coaching and intercultural competency, that's how I've experienced the two and the importance of them.
Great, excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Magda.
I always worked in HR, doing, in my mind, a very special type of HR when we give a lot of attention to people, to their goals, to their challenges, to their dreams. So coaching was always my tool to develop my work. And basically, intercultural development came to me because when I moved to the US, I am Brazilian. When I moved to the US, the intercultural differences were so important. And I had so many stories, some that are very funny. Some of them, people feel sorry that I was in that situation, but understanding with a Brazilian perspective, the situations, work situations, life situations in the US, and being able to navigate these differences brought me to study more and more about intercultural competence, diversity and inclusion, and all social justice topics.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. So our next question is, why is the marriage between coaching and intercultural sensitivity important?
And Magda gets to go first on this.
Yeah. You know, today is so hard for me to not have coaching and intercultural development associated to each other. Today I can't separate them because every interaction we have our own world dealing with someone with a different world. In my case, being Brazilian, living in the US, this happens 24/7, right? In my job, I work for a German company, so with a lot of work relationships in South America. So the whole time I am dealing with different mindsets, with different paradigms, with different frameworks. So most of the time we need to understand our language first, even if we are objectively talking English, but we need to understand our cultural language in order to be able to work together, to achieve something. But more on a personal level, to me, intercultural development, intercultural sensitivity is something that is part of my values. I want to be able to develop myself, to be in a relationship with someone, respecting this person as much as I can, and not being blind to important things for this person. And I had so many situations when I got feedback about the time I spend to answer a question. Can you go to the point faster? Can you speak faster? So many signs I had in my life that I was not being seen or heard, right? In some cases, I was being hurt instead of heard, right? And so to me, intercultural sensitivity, intercultural development, and competence is kind of, it is a value for me. It is something that I can't separate from my practice.
Wonderful. So it's become a core part of who you are and how you practice.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Akasha.
Yeah, so there's a personal story that stands out for me. The one I alluded to earlier, where I was being coached by this happened to be a white female coach, American as well, and she actually was we got connected somehow, and so we were in a coaching relationship, and I remember I was a Christian back then, so that there's a story there. But I remember I was talking with her about this practice that I sort of given myself. I just sort of write something every morning, so I would sit still, and whatever comes to me, I would just write it down, and it would sometimes come out in a bit poetic, nice way. Sometimes it's just all ramblings. And I remember one day we were talking, and I said to her, you know what, I think what's happening is when I sit still, I think God is giving me the message. God is giving me, what it is that I need to say. And her reaction to that really surprised me. Her reaction was, no, I don't think it's God. I think you're just listening to yourself, and you're hearing your inner voice. Now, so growing up in the Caribbean, being of African descent, and there are many cultures who view God and, you know, as very important, and religion is very important to them. And I think for me, God at that point was the thing, you know, and he was very important. And so for her, so Magna talked a few minutes ago about the language of the culture, you know, and this is not even just the actual language, linguistics, but also in terms of religious language, you know, other social identity, the way that we speak from those dimensions of ourselves. So when my coach said that, I immediately felt slighted, you know, that my religious perspective was being undermined. My God was being dissed. And so I couldn't hear anything else she was saying in that conversation. I actually didn't even want to be in the conversation with her anymore, you know? And so there's a way that we can, as coaches, attune to where our clients are in terms of their culture and the language that they're speaking from that culture. Even if we don't agree with it, but attune to it in a humble, respectful way. And intercultural sensitivity is also a way of being culturally humble, or invites cultural humility. And man, I think it's incredibly important during a coaching conversation.
Yeah.
So you bring up some really important points about meeting people where they're at and honoring their perspective. And so I'm sure we'll talk more about this. I'm curious about this next question is, how are you using cultural sensitivity in your work?
Do you want me to go first?
Please.
So I have been using intercultural development as my lenses throughout my work. If it's an HR topic, if it's a leadership topic, I always bring this perspective, and I invite leaders to also think about it. In a formal coaching engagement, I have been using IDI since 2015. And
can you explain what that is for those who are listening?
So IDI is an assessment that is reliable and valid in many cultures, many languages, where people can access their development in the intercultural continuum. So we always say there is no bad and good and wrong and right. There is a development at this moment, and this is an assessment that we take, and after this assessment, the whole coaching engagement starts developing on. It is totally confidential, as the whole coaching process is, and we start discussing with the IDP, the Intercultural Development Plan, what this coaching client is interested in developing. Most of the time, we have an assumption that we have this belief that we deal well with differences and with cultures. The benefit of having an assessment is to have a measurement, is to have a picture where we can discuss, okay, here I am at this moment. And then we start discussing how do we make sense of this assessment, right? I can share one situation of a coaching client. This leader has traveled all countries in the world, either for work or for life experience. But and this leader has studied abroad, many life experience across cultures. And when he received his assessment, he was surprised that he was in minimization. And he was, oh, I always thought I was dealing very well with different cultures. And how is that possible? So, yes. So this is great to have this image here. So this coaching client and I engaged into curiosity, thinking, well, you have extensively travels around the globe. What is that? So long story short, it was very valuable to him to identify that he has a value of harmony. He tries to keep harmony in all his relationships. So in his mind, talking about differences would bring less harmony. So in our coaching engagement, we discussed how can we honor harmony that is a value for you, and also recognize, respect, and live the differences that you have around you. So it was a big aha for him to elevate and bring both possibilities. Yes, I can strive for harmony and also talk about our differences here, right? In many other cases, when leaders and teams, because we can also do IDI team assessments and have a report that shows how a team or a project team is working. And then as a team, we discuss how comfortable are we discussing our differences, how appreciative are we of our differences, right? I was telling Akasha that just preparing this webinar with him brought me so much learning and insights, and I would like to keep doing the preparation, right? So I think the assessment is an objective measurement and information at certain point, and helps people to, in coaching, we use so many different assessments, right? In leadership, for example. So this one brings another perspective.
Great, thank you, Magda. And by the way, I put in the chat room the website for the IDI for those who might be interested.
You know, I don't use the IDS formally, and so just recognizing that there's some of us who do use an assessment like that, and or specifically this one, and some of us, even if trained in it, use a different approach. And I think there are some of us on the call who are like that. And so for me, it's being attuned to the various dimensions of the client. So for example, there's one particular client I have who has who's Asian American, and one coaching request she had was so I noticed that I am intensely subservient to my white male boss. And I know that I don't want to do this, but why am I doing this? This is not the person I see myself as. And so, you know, with her permission, we inquired into how her cultural socialization may have been impacting on the way that she shows up in the organization. And it was such a powerful conversation because she already knows this about herself, but to be able to look at it and to say, yes, in my culture, we are told to respect not just men, but we're told to respect white men because they're the ones in power. They're the ones who have the privilege. And so I then have to depend on them for my growth, for my benefit, and not realizing that she was doing that. So even if we then sort of use an assessment, you know, I think our clients, especially our clients who are of non-dominant or underrepresented cultures, you know, if, Caribbean, African, Asian, Americans, chances are there gonna be some elements of their cultural identity that's going to be at play in their context, whether it's organizational, educational, or even in our coaching relationship. You know, even the experience I shared earlier with my white coach, we've never talked about that. You know, the fact that she's white female and I'm black male from the Caribbean and she's American. But those things were actually playing a role in our interaction, and we just weren't making them explicit. And I think it's actually quite powerful for our development as coaches, as well as our clients, to highlight some of those things. You know, obviously, I think it's important we have to keep to the client's agenda for sure. And this difference might be an elephant in the room. And I think even if with their permission, you know, say, hey, is this an elephant in the room? At least to be curious about it, I think is important. The other thing that I think is also important is even as we apply assessments, you know, because a lot of assessments I would assert the data is mostly gotten from maybe white Western responses and people. So there's a way I think that people who are from non-dominant cultures might feel lost in, and may even feel that certain assessments don't relate to them. You know, so even that's a conversation. It's not anything to fix, but it's something I think that is important to inquire with clients. I mean, I talk with clients all the time who challenge assessments. They say, well, this is not for me, especially clients from where I'm from in the Caribbean. You know, this is not for me. This is for, you know, American or European clients, but they can benefit from it. So having a conversation about, you know, that the cultural elements, whether some are overlooked or some are emphasized or privileged, is actually important as well in coaching conversations. You know, Magda and I were talking about, we had this sort of metaphor about how being with this relationship between intercultural competence and coaching, you know, it's like being in a vehicle, you know, where for us as coaches, the vehicle is coaching. This is how we are working with people, traveling with them, you know. And so for us, we think of intercultural competency as something that is under the hood. It may not be the engine, you know, if it's not there, the car would still work, but it's something as essential. Maybe the radiator. I'm not such a good mechanic, I don't know, but something that is important for the car to work. That if we don't attend to it, and something goes wrong, there's something that we miss in the conversation, then it would have an impact on how we move through the coaching relationship, and the client will also be impacted. But if we are attending to this, and we don't have to know everything, all the gender pronouns and all the racial issues. We don't have to read White Fragility and understand Frantz Fanon or, you know, all of these things, but to at least be curious, especially when we're working with clients across cultural differences. It does a lot to elevate our coaching.
Very well said, both of you.
Yeah, I just want to highlight what Donna Clark wrote on in the chat about curiosity.
Mm.
And probably the example that Akasha shared a few minutes ago about his coaching relationship with this coach that was not showing curiosity about his perspective. So having intercultural sensitivity is about being curious about this other world that is different than mine. So first I need to understand that there are different worlds. Mine is not the only one, right? and personally, Akasha and I, because we moved from one country to another, this learning is huge. Like, whoa, there are different ways of doing and navigating life. So curiosity is a key concept to address and help the client also to gain awareness.
Excellent. Well, we had one last prepared question before we open it up to a broader dialogue with our audience, and that was, what are some of the books that you guys are reading that are really at the forefront of this work, and anything you might recommend for our audience, and you know, we can put them in the group chat as well, but anything that's striking your attention or capturing your imagination at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I need to tell a very interesting story about this. So right now I am listening to So You Want to Talk About Race from Ijeoma Olu. And I have two kids, 5 and 8. And I am listening this book with them. So I realized that several concepts they just don't get, but there are so many concepts that they pay attention to each other and they start asking. Of course, it's not a book for kids. I recognize that. But I am taking advantage that when I am driving and I have them, sometimes I just want them to have some awareness. And I know Akasha also is with this book on his list, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very practical, very interesting book in terms of understanding race. Yeah.
And Donna just made a comment. She loves it as well.
Can you repeat it one more time just so we have it?
It is called
So You Want to Talk About Race. I'll put it in the chat here.
By Ijeoma Olu.
Yeah. And another cool book in terms of even looking at what might be in the way for us to talk about cultural differences, including racism, you know, is one called White Fragility. I think that's a very popular one. You know, and just looking at it in the sense of uncovering unconscious biases. You know, so you know, people might not think that they're racist, and that might not even be salient for them in their work. But this book, I think, is still good in looking at what's unconscious to us, even in terms of our assumptions and prejudices and so on. So I think it's useful in that sense. Even with that, there is Harvard University has a tool out called the implicit bias tool, simple assessment, and it's free that folks can also use, and that could provide them with where their gaps are. You know, so it's cool. We can recommend books and other resources, but I think a tool like the IDI, for example, that Magda has talked about, this implicit bias test, to get a sense of where one is, and then they might think about, like, what's an applicable resource for them. You know, so I think those are good places to start.
Excellent.
Yeah, more about the IDI, the Intercultural Development Continuum, all the all the work from Milton Bennett, and we shared one in our blog in preparation for this webinar. I have here with me basic concepts on of intercultural communication, and yeah, there are many good resources out there, and I think we are lucky that at this time we have good resources available. So as a coach, we can enhance our capacity and also help our clients to have more awareness.
Great. And Patricia Stoke just put another resource in their Ice Edge. I'm not familiar with it, but it sounds very good in terms of communicating cross-culturally. Another one that we talked about, Magda, is Talking to Strangers, which is an odd one on the list, but it's actually pretty cool. This is a new book by Malcolm Gladwell.
Yeah.
And again, just, again, curiosity, or unconscious biases. So it's a really cool book. I'll put that in the chat too.
I need to confess that Talking to Strangers to me was very impactful. And I can't wait to listen again to process the book, because some parts. One resource that I really liked, I was reading this year, is From Sabotage to Support, a new vision for feminist solidarity in the workplace. So this is specifically on this perspective of the feminism and how women can support each other.
What I also think is cool as resources, I mean, there's so many movies out now about engaging across differences, and not just race, although those are perhaps more prominent. And I think another way that we could explore this is asking our clients who are from different cultures, like, what's a resource that I could tap into, I could check out that would teach me more about your culture, or any other culture. For example, I remember there's this film on Netflix, because I'm trying to also understand gender more, and gender non-conforming, or those who identify as gender non-conforming. And I found this film on Netflix called Girl. It's really quite interesting. I like it a lot, and it was really documenting a young person's transition from their surgery transition from they were born in a female body, and they wanted to transition to what they felt was their natural gender and sex. And so it was documenting that journey for her, and it gave me such incredible insight about the psychological aspect, even the physical pain, of making the transition of that, and why it is so important. So there are films out there. I remember I watched Green Book with another coach of mine, which is a more of a racial type of story, but it's quite powerful to see it with him, because there's this Black musician, African American musician, very wealthy, very well known, and hired a white driver in a time when the US was so segregated, and this driver was driving him to the South, and they developed this incredibly unusual relationship that was quite impactful for my coach friend and I, because he's also white American. So things like that I think are also cool ways that we can actually build our cultural competence and sensitivity.
Excellent. So at this point, I want to open it up to the audience. So if you have a comment or question or anything you'd like to ask Akasha and Magda, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and also turn on your video if you like. Anyone have a specific thing they'd like to bring up?
Oh, remember the Titans. That's good.
I have a question.
Welcome, Patricia.
Hi. I was just wondering if anyone does any kind of using intercultural competency specifically as the main part of their coaching. I mean, I understand the part about it's always there. It's a part of what's going on in the conversation and relationships, etc., and important to keep in mind and to bring up. However, I was also thinking about I've lived overseas for some time, done traveling, I've done research on global mindset and other things. And one of the areas I've been thinking about is doing more coaching with individual expats or returning expats or people who are in cross-cultural experiences that may need some support in that. And so I was curious if anybody's doing that kind of work, or what experiences they have in that area. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So Akasha, Magda, aware of anyone primarily focusing on this?
Yeah, I don't do the work specifically. It is part of my coaching practice.
I know there's some consulting firms that do specialize in this, and they do a mix of coaching and training. I'm on one of the coaches as part of Inclusion Inc. And actually, the CEO of Inclusion Inc. did a webinar with us a few months ago. Her name is Shirley Engelmeyer. So if you want to listen to that webinar that's been is on our website, she talked a lot about the work they do, and they have another instrument called the Inclusive Leader 360, and they use that as a way to give leaders and executives feedback on how well they operate across cultures. And they can do comparisons across any dimension of difference. The common ones are race, gender, and age, but they also have done them across countries. We had one particular organization that looked at U.S. versus other countries, because they were a global firm. So they wanted to see how the different regions saw this particular leader, or a set of leaders that we were evaluating. Then we, of course, coached them all on how to improve in the specific areas that they could do more to be more inclusive. So that's one organization I know that does a lot of this work, Patricia, and I work with them as one of their contract coaches.
Patricia, you might like the Cultural Map book, and is exactly this part of addressing country and nation differences and how do we relate.
Did that answer your question, Patricia?
Yes, thank you. That helps. Those are some interesting. So.
And Reem put something in the chat, another.
Yeah, I was just noticing. So Inclusion Incorporated, is that the one, Terry, that you were referring to?
Yeah, that's the organization I work with, one of the organizations I work with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Reed, I see you've come online. Welcome, Reed.
Welcome, Reed.
Hi, Reed.
Hello, Patricia. I've not done a lot of work as a part of my practice, but what has arisen in my practice is generally working with a person who is not of the culture in the organization. Like, as Akasha said, an Asian working in an American company or what have you. So I've done a bit of that. But most of my experience has been with multinational organizations or companies, be they pharmaceutical or technical, or in fact, a lot of work with the UN and USAID and the World Bank. And what I've learned from doing a lot of multicultural groups. We were generally brought in a training sense, to help a multicultural group collaborate. So they had a common goal of some sort. Even in some cases, if it was just, let's get along better with each other. But what I found, and I want to back up or want to underscore, is the curiosity, commitment, and bringing it to the point of being curious about that person as a whole person. You know, I think of the movie Avatar, where the greeting is, I see you. And it's not just I see you, it's I deeply see you. And the person must feel they have been seen. It's not enough that you just tell them that. You have to be in such a way that they get that you see them.
Yeah.
And I think there's an African greeting in East Africa that is the same thing.
Sarabona.
That's incredibly important. And there's intercultural, it can be within an organization. Oh, the people in this silo and that silo act differently, or this level, that level act differently, as well as nationality, culture, sex, race. And I try to put that all into what is a whole being. We have our DNA, we have our family, the way we were raised in the family, we have the time in history, the culture, the society, and our own experience in the world. And I generally try to get my groups to understand those differences so that they can see that this is a whole person, and to take a lot of it lightly. I know I worked in Puerto Rico for a while, and there were Mexicans, Cubans, and Puerto Ricans, and they would argue with each other, but then they would also lightly laugh. Oh, she's a Puerto Rican, and people would laugh, and it wasn't an accusation. It was taking in the differences in a light-mannered way, not taking it serious. And that, if you can get that started in a group, it's part of not having to protect yourself in your culture. So, you know, that's been my experience, and I've worked in a lot of these areas. I've worked as an outsider within another culture, and so it's something that I've learned from working in India, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Kenya, Sudan, actually, and so I guess I've honed by being successful and making some funny mistakes along the way. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Reed.
Something that I have been trying something that I have been trying to talk to my clients is, we usually think about intercultural development as different cultures, different countries. And what I loved, I loved everything Reed said, but one piece that I connected very well is seeing the other person. And maybe it's from the same country as me. We are from the same country, and we have different culture views, right? Yeah. So as much as I can, I try to have a different perspective on, it's not about different countries.
Yeah, I mean, I also resonate a lot with that, Reed, because I mean, I was recently facilitating an experience that was intentionally designed around connecting across differences. And one of the things that surprised me in a way was that, you know, there were people of color there, white people there, and one of the young persons of color said, you know, my biggest challenge is with my people of color group, because I feel like they don't see me. for who I am, and she's they is gender non-conforming, and so there's a way that they don't feel seen and embraced fully, because that gender piece, which is salient for them as a part of their identity, is not seen. So you're right. So even within, as you said, Magda, even within the same culture, folks can have that experience of being invisible. How many people in organizations feel invisible, even within the same cultural group?
Yeah, I led a negotiation exercise in Vienna, and there was they were put into teams, they negotiated with each other, and we talked about the theories of negotiation, and then I asked, so what surprised you about the way the other person negotiated? And we had a guy from Egypt saying, well, I had my mind made up that she being a French woman, was going to negotiate this way. And she didn't. It really surprised me. It told me something about my assumptions about French women. And it was a big learning, and it opened up a discussion, a big discussion about cultural differences.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's all I got to say.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Reed. Anyone else have a question or comment that they'd like to add to this important conversation?
So, Terry, this is James Warner, and I'm on the flip side of some of the culture situations. I primarily I'm living in China and have been for the last 10 years. So I'm the foreigner, and so as we talk about the stages that people go through, the looking at our own culture, looking at other cultures, and I can really relate to how valuable. I didn't have any support when I came over here to help me work through acculturation, and how valuable it would be as coaches to help people through that process. But so very, very different being on this end of it. So thank you.
Right, thank you. Thanks for your thoughts.
Yeah.
So we had a comment or question from Marcia about a process that you're using. Marcia, would you like to share a little bit about it?
Hi, can you hear me?
We do hear you.
Just in the last year, I have begun to invite some of my clients, not all, but most of them. I invite them to do some identity mapping, and it's an assignment. And I give them kind of a template and very simple instructions, and just let them and tell them to work on it every day, because I say you have a lot of different identities, but along with the identities, to pick out the ones. I love what has been identified as the salient identities, those salient identities that come along with values or traditions or rituals, or that really are just really prominent in your life. And then how does that really show up in your everyday presence as a leader, and oftentimes potentially clash with other identities when you're not aware of what's happening. And so a lot of individuals have really found that very, very useful because they never really have thought about their social identities, or even the intersectionality of their identities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. And I love the fact that you talked about intersectionality as well, Marsha. That, for many of us, we're multidimensional beings, and so a lot of identities are important, and sometimes they overlap, or class or race or gender and so on. And at times and in different contexts, some might be more salient than others. So, and it's up to us to to discover what that might be for the client.
You're exactly right. I mean, I have an example. I'm an African-American woman. So on occasions, the African-American aspect is much more salient than the gender. And on others, it's the gender. And on many occasions, it's both. And I was actually selected to coach a white male executive. Engineer in an organization, and he had been accused of inappropriate remarks to a female. Well, needless to say, it was rather uncomfortable during our first half an hour. And finally, I just threw it out there. And I said to him, I said, you know, what's going through your mind right now? I'm sitting in front of you as your coach, an African-American woman. And the reason that I have been brought in to coach you. And really and truly, as soon as I threw that out there and we had that necessary but uncomfortable conversation, our coaching relationship lasted for 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
But I had to bring it up because I just knew that, you know, the thought bubbles were there, even though he wasn't saying anything. And so, yeah, so I really think that it's important to bring that conversation into the coaching relationship.
Yeah.
The power of here and now, right?
Oh, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, we have I think we have time for this one last question from Viv. And Viv, do you want to ask it, or should I read it? If you want to come online, you're welcome to do that. Okay, great. Are you aware of any work being done among coaching certification programs in regard to intercultural competency? One thing Fielding has done in this space, starting in the September term of this year, we refreshed our curriculum, and intercultural competency is one of the core theories, right, that we use as part of our theory base for evidence-based coaching. And Akasha, you might want to speak a little bit to it. I think in your class there was this term, there was some elements in that. It also is coming up in you know, the other courses as well that are the various faculty are teaching at the moment.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad, Viv, that you asked this question, and nice to see you. And there's so much evidence that is becoming more and more important to coaches because it's important to clients. And so even in the class that I teach, although we have specific discussions around gender, around age, in terms of some of the differences that we have highlighted, even within those, you know, students or adult learners are exploring even their own cultural perspective on some of these topics, even if they're not explicitly around culture, but they're bringing, if we're even just talking about, you know, positive psychology, you know, what it means in the African American traditional culture, you know, to look at these issues and this topic. So as you've said, Terry, we have specific modules around culture, particularly gender, age, and then the others come out. The others come out in all the other topics. And that's been actually quite powerful to experience and to be in conversations with learners around.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much. Well, I just want to acknowledge our panelists today, Dr. Akasha and Magda Kaspary. Thank you both for the time and energy you put into preparing for this workshop, and then your thoughtful responses and dialogue with us today. And this will be an ongoing conversation, right? And that certainly will continue to evolve over time. I again thank you for your time and energy, and for our audience as well, for coming online and offering their thoughts. I also just want to invite everyone, if you're not yet a member of the coaching community of practice at Fielding, we invite you all to join. You do not need to be part of Fielding from an alum or student perspective. It's open to the world. And all you have to do is go to it's fielding. I'll get it right here in a minute. It's ccop.fielding.edu. So again, ccop.fielding.edu, and this is the web page. You can learn about all the great things that we offer in the community of practice, and you can become part of that. And maybe do your own webinar or blog for us if you like. All you have to do is click the subscribe button at the bottom of the page and fill out a very, very short survey, and we will add you to our Basecamp community, and you'll receive invitations for all of our webinars and our blogs. We also have a monthly blog and if you want to learn more, Akasha and Magda have written a blog for today's webinar, and you can learn more about their work by reading their blog. Upcoming just next week, we have another intercultural webinar that's related. This one is going to be titled Race Matters in Coaching, an examination of coaches' willingness to have difficult conversations with leaders of color. So this will be a fascinating conversation from a guest of Fielding, Ariel Finch Bernstein, who did his dissertation research in this topic. So come and listen if you would like to learn more about specifically coaching leaders of color. I think it'll be a fascinating dialogue, and you can hear his cutting edge research in the space. After that, we also have a webinar on January 11th on coaching abrasive leaders dealing with defensive,ness. Our very own Laura Crawshaw will be talking about her research and her work on what she's known as the boss whisperer, right? So she has a whole program and research dedicated to coaching abrasive leaders. So if you're working with people who might be narcissists or people of that nature, this is the webinar for you to learn how to deal with clients that might be normally tough to deal with. She's really mastered this. So we're really looking forward to hearing from her on January 15th. And then on January 29th, we'll have another webinar, a panel of folks who work with military leaders as well as veterans. So we'll hear from Fielding Scholar practitioners that and other also special guest Joe Lara from the Honor Foundation will be talking about his work in using coaching to help military leaders move from military service to civilian life. So, and then also leaders who coach folks in the military. So I think this will be another fascinating conversation. So you can keep in touch with us by, again, joining the CCOP. There's no charge, and stay on top of all these fascinating conversations that we're going to be having throughout the next year. So again, thank you all for coming. And this will be recorded and posted on Fielding's website in the next few days. If you have any friends or colleagues that you think might benefit from listening to today's webinar, and you can always listen to any of our webinars by going to coach.fielding.edu and then clicking on either our thought leaders videos, or you can also click on our professional series videos and listen to any of our past guests who have been on this program. So again, thank you all, and have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Bye, everyone.